I never thought it would come to this. For years, I had been the quiet man at the edge of the valley, the one people barely noticed. My land was my sanctuary, passed down from my grandfather, who broke his back tilling the soil, raising cattle, planting apple trees, and teaching me the old lesson: water is power, son. Treat it with respect, and it will keep you alive. Forget that, and it will destroy everything. On the north ridge stood the dam. It wasn't large enough to power cities or supply whole towns, but it was ours. Built by my grandfather's hands, stone by stone, reinforced over decades, it collected the seasonal rains and snowmelt, feeding my fields through irrigation ditches. Without it, the land would have turned to dust long ago. For me, that dam was more than a structure. It was heritage. It was life. It was control. But then came the HOA. It began innocently in HOA, or so I thought. I noticed men in neon vests and hard hats one spring morning, walking through my orchard rows with clipboards. At first, I figured they were county workers checking drainage or the power lines. When I approached them, the tallest one, a smug-looking fellow with mirrored sunglasses, barely looked at me. "Sir, we're just conducting a survey for upcoming development." "What development?" I asked. "The subdivision expansion." HOA approved. "It's all in the plans." I nearly laughed. "This is my land. You can't just walk in and start drawing lines." He gave me a shrug that still burns in my memory. "Take it up with the committee." I went to the county office the next day, deed in hand. The land had been mine for 20 years, inherited legally, taxes paid without fail. Yet when I spoke to the clerk, she gave me a bureaucratic smile that felt rehearsed. "Some parcels were recently reclassified," she said. "It looks like portions of your acreage were rezoned for residential expansion. It's complicated paperwork, Buta." I cut her off. "Complicated? Lady, my grandfather's buried on that land. That's not paperwork. That's theft." She shrugged, her nails tapping the desk. "You can file a dispute, but these things take time." I did. I filed every form they shoved in front of me, but each step was a dead end. Attorneys wanted retainer fees I couldn't afford. The sheriff looked at my papers, then at the new maps, and told me to work it out civilly. With people who had already stolen my home. Weeks later, the trucks arrived. Bulldozers tore through my orchards, leveling trees that had stood longer than some of those workers had been alive. Cement mixers poured foundations. By summer, the skeletons of houses sprouted like weeds. I stood there, powerless, as they erased my past. Neighbors drove by and waved at me as if nothing was wrong. Some even said, "Hey, it'll be good for the community. Property values will go up." Property values? My family's sweat wasn't a property value. It was history. By the end of that summer, 35 homes stood where my orchards once grew. Identical boxes with beige siding, manicured lawns, white vinyl fences, and HOA flags planted proudly out front. Families moved in. They smiled. They waved. Kids rode bikes across my old fields. Dogs pissed on the ground where my grandfather's boots once dug furrows. And every time I protested, the HOA sent me letters of thinly veiled threats saying I was trespassing on communal property or harassing residents. I wasn't the owner anymore, they claimed. I was the outsider. One evening, I sat by the dam. The sun dipped low, painting the water gold. My grandfather's words echoed in my head: "Water is power." And that's when it struck me. They could take my land on paper. They could bulldoze my orchards, plant their little plastic mailboxes, and slap HOA bylaws on top of everything. But there was one thing they could not change. The valley still bent to the water, and the water was mine. I looked at the heavy gates of the dam. I knew exactly how much pressure rested behind them. Years of rainfall, melted snow, and diverted streams, all waiting, silent and obedient. The thought terrified me, but it also thrilled me. I tried to resist it for weeks. I told myself there had to be another way. I wrote letters to the county. I called every lawyer in the phone book. I even tried reasoning with the HOA president, a man named Collins who strutted around like a mayor. He smirked at me. "You should be grateful, old man. We're giving this valley real value. Why don't you sell what little land you have left and move on?" That was the moment I knew there was no going back. The first rains of autumn came hard. The dam brimmed higher than I'd ever seen. Down below, the HOA community held a block party, music echoing up the valley, barbecue smoke rising like a flag of conquest. I stood at the ridge, looking down on the rows of identical homes, their porch lights blinking on in the dusk. I thought of my grandfather, of his rough hand stacking stones, of his voice telling me water was power. They thought they had won, but they had built their empire in a floodplain. On my floodplain, and I still held the key. To be continued with a broken bar. The valley looked different at night. From the ridge, the rows of houses glowed like a false constellation, porch lights and street lamps twinkling in smug imitation of stars. The HOA had even installed one of those community fountains at the entrance, water spraying skyward, lit up with colored bulbs, like a slap in the face. I watched it all from the dam. My dam, the only thing left that still felt like mine. Behind me, the reservoir churned, swollen from weeks of autumn storms. The concrete and steel groaned faintly under the weight. I could feel the choice pressing on me. In front of me, a community that had stolen my land, ignored my rights, and laughed in my face. Behind me, millions of gallons of water waiting for release. The first crack. I didn't sleep much in those days. My nights were restless, filled with my grandfather's voice and the laughter of the HOA president. Sometimes I'd dream of orchards, the air heavy with the smell of apple blossoms, and then I'd wake to the distant sound of children screaming and play, bikes clattering on sidewalks that weren't supposed to exist. One night, during a storm, I went out to check the dam. A hairline crack had formed in one of the old stones near the gate. Water seeped through, trickling into the spillway. I knelt, running my hand through it. Cold, relentless, alive. That's when I realized, if I did nothing, the dam might fail on its own. Someday, maybe months from now, maybe years. But if I chose the time, the place, the manner, then it wouldn't be an accident. It would be justice. The confrontation. I tried one last time to talk sense into them. I cornered Collins, the HOA president, outside his pristine garage as he polished his SUV. "You built on my land," I said, voice shaking. "This whole valley used to belong to my family. You had no right." He smirked, the same smug expression that made my blood boil. "You don't get it, do you? Land doesn't belong to people like you anymore. It belongs to people who can use it, who can pay for it. That's progress. You can either keep whining or cash out and leave." "Progress?" I spat the word. "You erased history." "History doesn't pay property taxes," he shot back. "Now, if you'll excuse me, some of us have real work to do." And with that, he closed the garage door in my face. That was the last straw. The opening. The storm that week was one for the books. Rain pounded the valley, filling the reservoir to the lip. By Friday night, the pressure on the gates was immense. I stood in the control shed with the old steel wheel in my hands. I hesitated. Every rational thought screamed at me to stop. If I opened those gates, water would tear through the valley like an angry beast. Homes would be ruined, people displaced, maybe even lives lost. But then I thought of my grandfather, of the orchards, of the surveyors walking my land like it was theirs, of Collins' smirk, of every letter calling me a trespasser on the land I had inherited. My jaw tightened. My hands turned the wheel. The gates screeched, reluctant at first, then shuddered as water burst through the opening. A thunderous roar filled the night. I staggered back as the flood poured down the channel, a wall of liquid fury racing toward the subdivision. For a moment, guilt stabbed through me sharp, paralyzing. But then, as the roar grew, so did something else inside me. Not pride, not joy, something darker, heavier, inevitability. The valley drowns. It took less than 20 minutes. From the ridge, I watched the water consume the streets. Lawns vanished first, then driveways, then the first floors of houses. Cars bobbed like toys, alarms blaring before shorting out. People scrambled onto rooftops, their shouts carried faintly on the wind. The fountain at the community entrance sputtered, lights flickering, then disappeared beneath the surge. Collins's house was one of the first to go. I saw him and his family on the roof, waving flashlights, screaming for help. I felt a broken bar. Nothing, not joy, not sorrow, just a cold, hollow satisfaction. The land was cleansing itself. The silence after. By morning, the storm had passed. The valley lay beneath a vast, murky lake, rooftops poking out like gravestones. Helicopters buzzed overhead, rescue crews working frantically. I stood by the dam, staring down at what I had done. My hands trembled. My chest felt tight. Had I gone too far? Had I become the villain in my own story? But then I remembered the bulldozers, the smirks, the letters calling me a trespasser. They had taken everything from me. Now the water had taken everything from them. It wasn't justice. It wasn't vengeance. It was balance. The aftermath. The media called it a catastrophic dam failure. Officials speculated about poor maintenance, heavy rains, natural wear. Nobody suspected deliberate action, and not yet. I didn't correct them. I sat quietly in my cabin on the ridge, listening to the distant hum of helicopters, the chatter on the radio about displaced families and federal aid. The county promised an investigation, but I doubted they'd find anything conclusive. The dam was old. Cracks had been visible for years. All I had done was a broken bar speed up the inevitable. In the weeks that followed, the HOA disbanded. The community was declared uninhabitable. Insurance companies balked. Families moved away, scattering like leaves in the wind. The valley was mine again, not as it once was, lush with orchards and pastures, but as a quiet lake, reflecting the sky. Some nights, I sat on the ridge and watched the moonlight shimmer on the water's surface. It was beautiful, in a haunting way. My grandfather would have wept at the loss of the orchards, but maybe, just maybe, he would have understood the lesson. Water is power, and power, once taken, must one day be returned. Epilogue. They built 35 homes on my land. Now, 35 rooftops sit half submerged, Silent reminders of arrogance. People ask me if I regret it. I never answer, because regret is for those who had a choice. I never did. The lake that drowned the subdivision didn't vanish overnight. It lingered, heavy and stagnant, swallowing the valley whole. Roofs jutted from the surface like black teeth. Street signs poked above the waterline, pointing uselessly toward drowned cul-de-sacs. In the mornings, mist rolled across the new lake, hiding the destruction beneath a soft white veil. From a distance, it looked almost peaceful, like the valley had been born to be a reservoir. But beneath that calm surface was ruin. The investigators. It didn't take long for officials to swarm the area. Engineers inspected the dam, helicopters circled, news vans set up on the ridge. They called it a once-in-a-century storm combined with inadequate maintenance. One engineer ran his hand along the cracked stones, shaking his head. This thing was a disaster waiting to happen. I almost laughed. If only he knew. Reporters tried to interview me, the local landowner. I told them the truth, but only part of it. The dam was old, I said. I warned people. No one listened. It wasn't a lie. Just not the whole story. Collins, the HOA president, was interviewed from a rescue shelter. His voice cracked with anger as he called for accountability, demanded compensation, threatened lawsuits. He looked small in those news clips, hair unkempt, pride drowned along with his leather couches and polished SUV. I replayed the footage over and over, savoring it. Whispers in town. Word spread fast in nearby towns. Some pitied the families who lost everything. Others muttered that the subdivision had been cursed from the start. Old-timers at the diner would glance at me, then look away. They knew the land had been mine. They remembered the orchards. They didn't say anything outright, but their silence said enough. Did he do it? Nobody asked me directly. Nobody dared. The guilt. At night, the silence of the valley pressed down on me. The water lapped against the new shoreline. Frogs croaked where porches once stood. But sometimes, in the stillness, I swore I heard other sounds. Distant cries, the wail of children, the frantic bark of a drowned dog, echoes that weren't there. I told myself no one had died, that rescue crews had saved everyone. The reports said as much. But still, the ghosts haunted me. One night, I dreamed of my grandfather. He stood by the dam, face stern, arms crossed. You used the water, he said. For justice, I replied. He shook his head. Water doesn't care about justice. It only obeys gravity. What you did, it wasn't justice. It was choice. I woke drenched in sweat, unsure if I had defended my family's honor or betrayed everything he taught me. The visit. 2 months after the flood, I heard a knock at my cabin door. A federal investigator stood there, tall, lean, sharp eyes. He introduced himself as Agent Rollins, from the Bureau of Reclamation. Routine follow-up, he said. Mind if I ask a few questions? I let him in. He sat at my table, notebook open, pen ready. Locals say you knew the dam best. Spent your life maintaining it. You notice anything unusual before the failure? My palms sweated. It had cracks. It was old. I warned folks. He studied me for a long moment. His silence pressed like a weight. Then he nodded and closed his notebook. Nature has a way of correcting mistakes, he said quietly, almost as if to himself. Then he left. I sat in that silence for hours afterward, wondering what he really meant. The return of the water. Winter came. Snow piled on the ridges, feeding the reservoir. By spring, the lake grew even larger, spreading into the hollow shells of homes. The rooftops finally sank one by one, disappearing beneath the surface. It was as if the valley was swallowing its shame. Sometimes, kayakers and fishermen would come, treating the lake as a novelty. I'd watch them from the ridge, fury simmering. They didn't know this wasn't a playground. It was a graveyard. And yet, part of me felt relieved. The more the water expanded, the more it erased the scars of the subdivision. Soon, nothing would remain but the lake and the memory.